Okay, well, let's get started on what we have to discuss today. Let me stop sharing the poll. And I'm going to start off with introductions. So today I have joining us more new faces. So I've introduced myself. I'm Evelina. I head up our analytics and data solutions at Uber Media. We also have a special guest today, Leiden Faust, the CEO of Spatial AI. Thank you for joining us, Leiden. We also have Christopher Smith, our VP of Sales. I know a lot of people are familiar with him. He's worked with clients. We go out on a lot of client meetings, so you might see us paired together a lot. And then we also have Connor Bowland, our VP of Strategy at Uber Media. Great. So this week in social distancing, we're going to be focusing on Georgia and how it is faring during after stay-at-home orders. So we'll first look at measuring foot traffic over time in public places. So how has foot traffic changed and comparing that pre-COVID, during stay-at-home orders and after stay-at-home orders, and we'll quantify those trends. We'll also do a deep dive into QSRs and looking at what the new normal looks like with consumer behavior. And then we'll jump over to Leiden, who's gonna give us his analysis of social sentiment data and paired with mobile location data. All right, I'm gonna jump into it. I'm gonna ask everybody except Chris to jump off of webcam now, and Chris and I are gonna have a good discussion about what we're seeing in Georgia.
Great.
So I'm gonna go in with another poll now with Georgia. Before I dive in, let's launch this next poll here. So Georgia is reopening, and so that we're looking at where they're going right after reopening. I know that we have a lot of viewers on this webinar who are in states that have not reopened. And so I want to find out, what's the first thing you're going to do when your state reopens? And there we go, the poll has launched. Chris, thank you for joining us today. I asked Chris to join us because he's actually in Georgia right now. I won't say you're from Georgia because you're Canadian.
Yeah, when I say a or about, I think people kind of figure I'm not from here. I live, just to put it in some context, I live just outside of Atlanta in the suburbs, and I've been down here for about 18 years. So I've seen a lot over the last 2 months or so since the pandemic struck. And I think today, Evelina, I can provide some ground truth to kind of what we've seen with the data.
Yes, yeah. While I was working with our analysts and looking at this data, I'm like, I haven't heard of some of these brands before. Let me hit up Chris and see if he can give me some info as to what these trends are about. All right, I'm gonna end the poll here. And this is interesting, Chris. What we're seeing are kind of, the results are reflective of what our data is showing. The 40% of attendees today in today's webinar are planning to continue to remain home even after stay-at-home orders are lifted. And then the next one is visit a barbershop or a salon.
Right. Yeah, I think this is pretty well mirrors what we're going to be showing folks today.
Yeah, very exciting. All right, thank you for participating in our poll. For those who are going to be at happy hour at a bar, let me know, and I will join you. As social distancing bar hopping, right?
There you go. There you go. That's great.
When stay-at-home orders are lifted. All right, so why Georgia? So Georgia, we decided to focus on Georgia in this week's webinar because it's one of the first states to lift stay-at-home orders. And so it can really give us some insight into what can recovery start to really look like in a geography that has lifted stay-at-home orders. And so what we're going to start off today, I didn't know very much about Georgia, except from what the news is telling me. And so I kind of took all those news stories together and put together a timeline of how stay-at-home, of the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's laid out in Georgia. So what I have here is we have over 1.5 million polygons in our library, so hand-drawn locations. And we took all the retail, big industries, retail, restaurants, QSRs, salons and spas. I'll break it down later on. And looked at if people are going there, what are the foot traffic trends there? And here is a summary of that data. So what we see here in the beginning is looking at pre-COVID-19, so March 6th to March 19th. We see with around March 13th is when the state of emergency was put in nationally, and we start to see a decline in traffic during that time. But it's March 19th when Georgia decided to start putting local cities in Georgia started to put in local stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, I think what we saw, Evelina, was before our governor put the stay-at-home order, he really decided that he was leaving up to the local governments to put in different orders. So for example, obviously the city of Atlanta around March the 19th put down their order to stay at home, and a lot of counties started following suit. So that's kind of why you see that drop off between March the 19th and April the 3rd, where there wasn't, this other big cliff when the governor came out, because most Georgians were already staying home.
Yep. And from March 19th to when they lifted stay-at-home orders, April 24th, we see pretty much steady traffic. People are staying home, I guess, because I know that the orders in Georgia are not incredibly strict as some other states, right?
Yeah, I think, the orders here were maybe a little bit different than especially California, because you and I do talk a lot about the differences. Our beaches were open, they were closed, they were open again. Our state parks never closed. A lot of them were open. Golf courses were still open. Everything was being done with different social distancing concepts in place depending on where we were going. So there was some differences there, and there was differences in non-essential versus essential workers as well in Georgia versus a lot of other states. So what we've seen versus what you guys have been through is a little bit different, I would say.
Yeah, and looking at some of the other metropolitan cities like Los Angeles compared to Atlanta, I think there are a lot more dips and ups and downs in our traffic.
Yeah, I think ours was pretty steady after the governor issued his orders.
And then now we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick here.
Right.
So on April 24th, it was announced that non-essential businesses, including gyms, barbershops, massage therapy places, are allowed to open. And then they also started to allow on April 27th, dining services at restaurants, and then private social clubs were allowed to open too. And then overall, the stay-at-home order was lifted on April 30th.
Right. I think there are specific regulations around each and every one of these industries on how they can open, social distancing that people have to how far they have to stay apart. And I think as we get into this, Evelina, the data is really going to show, especially when we talk about gyms versus barbershops and salons, just how slow this progression is going to be. And I think you and I will probably harp on it maybe a little bit today, which is how that we're not going to see we don't see these big spikes yet. Not to say they might not come, but people are being extremely cautious here in Georgia still.
Well, that's good to hear because I know that I know there's been a little bit of a decline in the cases of COVID-19, but I think uh, the recommendations put out by the White House haven't all been met yet in terms of whether you should open or not. So I think being careful here is good to hear. So a reminder to everybody in the audience, we do have that question and answer button up in the Zoom in the taskbar. So if you want to get some ground truth knowledge about Georgia, or if you have any questions about what we're showing here, please use that Q&A. All right, so let's look at where people are going. So we did see that that uptake there, and let's see what different industries people are going to. So first, I wanted to do this analysis by looking at where we're seeing the most activity change. So this map here and the stats here show you what has been the percent change in foot traffic or in traffic in these metro areas during and after stay-at-home orders. So we see that Chattanooga, the metro area of Chattanooga, is at the top of this list. And generally what we see here is border towns are at the top of the list with showing the most traffic.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you look at that, Evelina, and you look at the states that border Georgia, and you compare the different orders that are in place versus Georgia, and the different businesses that might be open as well, not in your home state, that you could potentially be traveling to here in Georgia, where you couldn't go to a salon in one of the other states. Now maybe you kind of do need that haircut, right?
Yeah, actually, we did do a deep dive into this, and it's going to be a blog post up on the COVID-19.ubermedia website, where we look at what percentage of out-of-state visitors are some of our retailers and the border towns seeing. So it's interesting. People are crossing the border to get those haircuts. Well, we also did a deep dive into per sector traffic. And I think to understand what the lift of stay-at-home orders, the impact of the lift of stay-at-home orders are on each of these industries, we really need to understand how has COVID-19 impacted these industries in general. So we picked the major ones here. We have grocery stores, eating places, retails, hotels, spa, salons, fitness and recreation centers, and apparel, so a mix of essential and non-essential businesses. And what we did first is we quantified what the pre-COVID-19 numbers look like. And then we compared it to stay-at-home order periods. And what you have here in this chart is how much of a hit these businesses and these sectors took because of COVID-19.
Yeah, you see, you really get a good aspect of the places that were, completely closed down there, right, Evelina? If you look at the spas, the fitness and recreation, apparel and entertainment numbers, they completely dropped off. They were pretty much zeros. I think what you're seeing in there, they're not zeros, is because if you take, for example, a fitness center, right? They still had employees going in there. They were doing a lot of work, a lot of cleansing. They were doing online classes. So you still see that the percentage changes in 100, but it is basically closed.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and if you look at, then we compare this to, we compare these numbers to understand what the lifting of stay-at-home orders and how that has changed traffic. What we see is then some of these businesses opening back up, right?
Right, you see them opening back up. If you look at it, it's really interesting. Eating places, back, they increased by 21%. Obviously, here in Georgia, we're going to get into this a little bit later, but what we found was a lot of the brands and a lot of the independents still haven't opened up. There might be doing some they might be doing some pickups, some DoorDashes, Uber Eats, but they still haven't really opened back up, especially all the sit-down dine-ins. But there has been a number of spas and salons and barbershops that have opened back up. And I think one of the reasons maybe people are a little more comfortable there is you can set your own appointments. Some of them are extremely cautious of only allowing one stylist or two stylists in to the shops themselves. So that could be a couple of reasons why people are going there. And, the hair thing too, right?
Yeah, I was like, are you heading over to the barbershop, or do you even go to a barbershop?
Fair enough.
Well, I know for me, I was actually supposed to get a haircut right before all of this had started. And so I just missed that one appointment, and here I am, like my hair is growing way, way longer. And I call it, I saw Chris on webcam one day, and I'm like, oh, so that's the color of your hair.
That's true. You've never seen it before, right? It's been years since we worked together.
Well, we also see, I know fitness and recreation. I'm dying to go back to the gym. I know there are big movie goers out there, avid movie theater goers who are dying to get back into a movie theater. But I think because of the hit of COVID-19 on them, and also because people aren't really jumping up and down to get to there, even though they want to, we're not seeing a very big jump in their traffic.
Yeah. So, for example, the gym I go to here, they were planning to open, and then after looking at the regulations put down by the governor, it was very tough to enforce them. The social distancing part of having so many people within so many square feet of one another. Then just the cleansing of the equipment, the sharing of the equipment. You don't see a lot. There's no group classes allowed, so a lot of CrossFit gyms and whatnot aren't open yet. And then all those other aspects of daycare in the gyms, the showers in the gyms, things like that have a tremendous impact on whether or not people really want to get back there as quickly as they want. And they have done a pretty good job of the online classes. So it'll be interesting to track fitness over the next little while to see what that return is going to look like and what that curve really does look like.
Yeah, definitely. I think the smaller boutiques are probably going to see a little bit more business in the bigger gyms, perhaps, because the bigger gyms, you have to be more cognizant of social distancing. In the entertainment world, I know that they opened up, they allowed movie theaters, they allowed bowling alleys to open up. But I read an article about theaters, how they ended up laying off a lot of the staff. And so even though stay-at-home orders are lifted, they're not ready to open yet.
Right. And there's challenges across the board in entertainment, especially in the category we're calling eating places. We'll talk a little bit of that later on about the staffing issues that we see and we're hearing about.
Yep. Well, I wanted to also dive into some places that have opened and looking at that foot traffic. So what are some of the places that did open, and how much of an uptick did we really see in their foot traffic? So first, I looked at entertainment. There is the Main Event Entertainment and the Brunswick Zone. The Main Event Entertainment is more of your go to, I guess, arcade area, right? Arcade facility. And then Brunswick is a bowling alley, right? They own a bunch of bowling alleys. And what we see here is, yeah, there is a little bit of an increase in traffic, but it's not that dramatic.
No, it's not dramatic at all. And from what I understand, what I've read, especially with bowling alleys, not all the lanes are open. Again, they're adhering to social distancing orders by the governor. So you do see a little uptick there. Probably some parents who've had the kids in the house for a couple of months need to get out and have a little bit of space, a little bit of breathing. But again, like we talked about throughout our conversation, Evelina, the uptick is going to be slow.
Yeah. Even though we see a 50% increase with salon and spas. When we dive into brand level, the uptake is there, but it's not everybody. It's still in recovery.
Yeah, definitely agreed. Mm-hmm.
Supercuts, famous hair. We also put in massage envy here.
Yeah.
You had some really interesting insights with massage envy in terms of
it's really interesting to see that a massage envy has an uptick right now. But if you really start to think about it a little bit, they do have an interesting business model. They have subscriptions that they offer to their clientele. They do have drop-ins as well. But you have to think that, there are medical reasons as well why people need massages for bad backs and whatnot, and other ailments. So some folks might not even have a choice but to go back to get those massages and get back moving again. So it is interesting to look at subscription-based organizations such as Massage Envy to see, a lot of them have put memberships on hold or extended credits. But as Georgia turns around, when they turn around and say, okay, it's safe to come back, are we going to see spas or massage envies or other subscription-based businesses spike? So it'll be interesting to follow some of these brands.
Yep. Well, I think we're in the next section here. We're actually going to deep dive into one of these sectors, and that's what Chris had alluded to earlier, eating places. And we're going to look at what this new normal looks like. And with this section, I'm actually going to start us off with a poll. And I want to understand, I know QSRs are very easy to get to. So I want to understand, in the past week, how many times have you visited a QSR or a drive-through to a QSR? And it looks like I'm getting some Q&As coming in. So let me see while this poll is happening. All right, let me go through this poll and then I'll come back to the question that we got in the Q&A. All right, so this is interesting, Chris. And maybe it speaks to the audience we have here. Let me share our results. And so it looks like 50% of the audience have not visited a QSR in the past week.
Okay.
But a quarter of them, more than a quarter of them have visited once. And then we have one person that's admitting that they've gone 5 or more times.
Yeah, interesting results. I think as we go through it, depending on where everybody is right now, will really dictate, your answer to that question as well.
Have you been to a QSR in the past week?
I have, actually. I think, earlier this week, it was on Tuesday, I ran over to Chick-fil-A for lunch and picked something up by their curbside.
All right. They are very efficient there, so.
Yeah, they are.
Very good experience. All right, so let's dive into QSRs. So with this analysis, what we did is we took all of our polygons in that fell under eating places. So restaurants, quick service restaurants, casual dining places. And we looked at their foot traffic and calculated the average daily visitor counts by brand. And we took those visitor counts and we analyzed what the changes were compared to pre-COVID-19, during stay-at-home orders, and post-stay-at-home orders. And what we found here is a ranking, or what we did here is a ranking. And we took all the brands that were in our library, mostly national and some regional brands, and we ranked them by their average daily visitor counts. And what we see here is Chick-fil-A, top. No surprise there, right, Chris?
No surprise with Chick-fil-A. It's a home market. They dominate the market. They're really efficient with getting people in and out. and the dine-in when it was open. So no real surprise.
And
And
we got
McDonald's
to,
as well, obviously McDonald's. And
yeah.
I don't think there's too much of a surprise with this list here.
No, it's a mix of QSR and casual dining. And again, this is before stay-at-home orders, so people were still allowed to go out and dine within Olive Garden, go to Texas Roadhouse, Cheddar's. So it's a mix of casual dining and QSRs and some of those big brands that are associated with those sectors. So comparing their average daily visits to and how they've changed during stay-at-home times, we see some interesting changes here. So we see actually the casual dining categories here have dropped off of the top 10 list.
Right. Yeah. I don't think that's too much of a surprise, Evelina, when you really think about these casual dinings and the amount of business that's driven through the dining rooms and through the bars that are in some of them, right? They also have reduced hours when it comes to delivery and it comes to pickup. So like some of these had pickup before and delivery, some of them did not. And then layering in reduced hours, it's not a surprise to see each of these have been knocked down at least 10 points.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you have Texas Roadhouse and Olive Garden kind of switch places here.
Right.
So it's interesting to also see those who have had to change their business models to not be focused on dining in, how they've kind of adapted to COVID-19 if they decided to still have delivery or takeout.
Right, I think everybody they were kind of like on the fence about it, right? Whether or not to do it. So I think a really interesting one was Cracker Barrel here. Cracker Barrel, from what I can still recall, is still closed. So it's no surprise to me that they've dropped even further down. And I think one of the other issues with a lot of the restaurants, the casual dining restaurants that have not been open during this time or with limited hours for just drive-through, is they have staffing issues. Yeah. Right? They have a lot of staffing issues. They have supply chain issues. A lot of the workers have been laid off. So bringing those all back, it's all a part of the equation. And, for the owners of these casual dining restaurants, they really have to look at how quickly do they staff up? What does that supply chain look like? What can we get into the restaurants? And how many folks are allowed in the restaurant? That's a big issue for a lot of them, especially here in Georgia with the rules. And if I'm not mistaken, it states 6 people within 500 square meters. So that's not a big. That's a big space for only 6 people. And if you have a small restaurant, why would you open, right? If you have a smaller footprint. So all of these decisions still have to be taken into consideration before you open. And that's why I think you see companies like Cracker Barrel, Texas Roadhouse still down there. Olive Garden's opening up some here and there, but nobody's fully open yet.
Well, let's talk about those Cinderella stories. So these casual dining places have popped off of the top 10 list, and what we see are actually other QSRs that had previously been pretty low on the rankings have jumped up into the top 10 lists. And the whole thing is now, the whole top 10 list is all QSRs.
Yeah, I think, Evelina, I don't think this is too surprising to anybody, no. Right? It's, we kind of thought this would be the case. I think we're going to get a deep dive into Sonic, but, when you look at the adjustments some of these QSRs have made over the last 2 months, and looking at Chick-fil-A, for example, that stayed ranked number 1 here in Georgia, they've done a lot of work around social distancing, around optimizing how they're getting people through the drive-through, expanding curbside, adopting DoorDash and adopting Uber Eats. So know, there's a lot of work that they've done to try to keep their sales moving. And here's another interesting aspect of this, and maybe this is just my own theory as to, you know, why the QSRs are doing much better than casual diners, or casual dining is taking time to reopen, is if you look at the workers at QSRs tend to be younger, college students. They tend to be high school students. They're not in school. They have more time on their hands. They don't have the same staffing issues that you would find with a casual diner, to the degree anyway. And that's another reason why you know, you see this ranking change. And quite frankly, people just don't want to get out of their car very much either, right? So it's not a surprise. And if we look at Sonic over the next couple of slides, it's going to be really interesting to show how Sonic jumped in their business model overall, and how they can maybe, you know, capitalize a little bit on what they've seen.
Yeah, we had somebody in the Q&A ask what jumped into the number 5 slot, and that's Sonic, right? From 22 up to number 5.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big jump.
It's a massive jump. It goes to their business model. You know, if we look at, you know, the next few slides, Evelina, you know, we can talk a little bit more. I'll talk a little bit more about their business model and why they might be able to capitalize on what's going on.
Yeah, and so with that, transitioning here, I did this analysis using our Vista property reports, because Chris looked at this data and we talked about Sonic, we talked about what's changing, what could possibly be changing, and I'm like, we do have our Vista property report that we can pretty readily pull data from. And so I showed this in our last webinar. It was actually, we launched it last week, so it is available for everybody to go in and find out quick information about their location using mobile location data. What I did here is for the Sonic location that we decided to look at, I ran 2 Vista property reports. And one, what I did is I went in and polygoned the Sonic, so you can see that polygon here. And then I click Run Report for the pre-COVID-19 time, so before COVID-19. And what I came back with is a bunch of visitation information on this Sonic location before COVID-19. Now, I also wanted to be able to do this comparison against post during stay-at-home orders and post-stay-at-home orders. So I also ran the same report for the Sonic for post-COVID-19. So what I did here, I know last time I went back and forth between these 2 windows, and I was reminded by a product manager that I can go in and actually just export the image and put this into a nice deck and be able to do this study pretty readily outside of the Vista property report. So I did just that. I exported these images and I brought them back into this deck here so we can analyze the differences between before stay-at-home orders and during and after stay-at-home orders. So we looked at a Sonic drive-in in Calhoun, Georgia. And what we pulled here are the common evening locations of the devices that we saw in the polygon of that Sonic. So these are customers to that Sonic location. And what we did then is pull their common evening locations. So where does their phone sit mostly during the evening hours? And what does that mean in terms of origin points for that location? And so if we look at pre and post stay-at-home orders, what we have here in the before time period is that it's pretty spread out, but most of the visitors are mostly in this middle part here, pretty close proximity to the Sonic itself. But with the during and after stay-at-home orders, we do still see the spread out, but we actually see more clusters around this Sonic location. And if I look at this as a mobile trade area, so using mobile devices, mobile data to create your trade area, we can see how that has changed that trade area,
Yeah.
looking at pre and post stay-at-home orders.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the capture rate that they're getting off to the east, Evelina. And I think that is partly due to their concept themselves. For folks that are on the phone that aren't familiar with Sonic, they're a very low touch QSR. What I mean by that is they do a lot through the drive-through, but they're also drive up, kind of that 50s drive up diner style where they don't come out on roller skates, but you press a button, you order the food, and they bring it out to your car, and you can sit in your car and eat it. So it's an extremely low touch concept. They do have some tables in the middle of a lot where you can go and eat as well, but it's extremely low touch. And if I was Sonic, I would be trying to capitalize upon the new social distancing rules, how folks can still come to Sonic, look at, the folks that I've captured and really determine, these are the behaviors and attitudes that are changing. Come to Sonic because we're well aware and already understand what low touch could be doing. And then, and we'll get into it in a second as well, but that trade area expansion is huge as well. It could mean that I could open up another unit where I didn't think I could open one up, right, without cannibalizing too much. So there's a lot that the mobile data can do for you very simply through the tool that Evelina just said, when you look at before and after, and especially over the next six months here in Georgia.
Yeah, and in terms of marketing too, marketing to these new customers, making them loyal Sonic customers to this location.
Right, exactly. Excellent point.
Great, so I'm going to throw this one to you, Chris, because
Sure.
I think you put this together or you summed it up really well in terms of what can mobile data do for during the recovery period for these businesses?
Yeah, mobile data is about as real time as we can get, right? And I know there's some lags in our data, but it really will help us understand the changes of consumer preferences and behaviors over the next 6 months, year, 18 months, however long this goes on for. You can really understand through that Sonic example of, how has my customer base changed? How has my trade area changed? How often are people coming? What is really happening with, my competition? Is my competition suffering? Are their trade areas shrinking? Is there an opportunity for me to kind of swoop in and get a customer that I didn't think I could get before? So utilizing not only mobile data, but bringing in, like Evelina mentioned, your marketing team to the equation and marketing to areas that maybe you didn't do local marketing to before will help you create a larger, more loyal customer base in what we're trying to figure out as the new normal.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us in this webinar today and giving us the underground knowledge of what's going on in Georgia. Thank you for your time, and
Great.
Hopefully I'll see you soon after these stay-at-home orders, right?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Evelina. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, well, I'm going to transition here. Thank you, Chris, again, for talking about Georgia in terms of foot traffic and the different sectors. I'm actually going to switch now to introduce Leiden Faust from Spatial AI. Leiden, are you jumping on?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, great. Thanks for joining us today. Let me do a little introduction about Leiden. Leiden is the co-founder of Spatial AI, the creator of Geosocial data, a Techstars company. Before Spatial, Leiden was an ethnographic research consultant for brands like P&G, J&J, Intel, and an adjunct professor of ethnography at Miami University. Very impressive. So thank you so much, Leiden, for being here today. I'm also very excited to announce that Uber Media is entering a partnership with Spatial AI. And that's partly why we're having you on today, because you've been able to do some really enhancements to mobile location data with social sentiment data. So to assist in their efforts of studying the impact of COVID-19, we provided them with a distance travel from home data set to study social sentiment data. So Leiden, I'm going to throw it to you to talk about what you've been able to find here.
Cool. Thanks, Evelina. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background. Geosocial, some of you in the webinar might not know about it. And then I'll go into the correlation analysis that we did with the distance travel from home metric that we got. But ultimately, what Geosocial does for the mobile movement data is it tells you who is the types of people that are behind the devices and their interests. So stepping back, the insight that sparked Geosocial data is that there's billions of people talking about their mindsets, interests, and attitudes on social media. There was no company that was capturing that information at a geographic level. So that's what we do. We pull from data sources like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Flickr, Foursquare, event data to understand that location and the types of people there and what they're doing. So it's a study of people by what they do. We organize all of those posts into 72 different geosocial segments using a clustering algorithm, which I'll get into just in a second, so that we can see across every block group in the United States, are people foodies? Are they into fitness? Are they into yoga, fashion, or hip hop? And ultimately, what that creates is a vivid picture of a community. And then attaching that to the devices that come from that community give you also a vivid picture of those people. So yeah, I would really consider the movement data and geosocial data as sister data sets, just in the way that we used to define trade areas as 1, 3, 5 mile radiuses, or we'd have to do a ton of surveys to understand what a trade area was. We don't have to do that anymore. We can actually see the people visiting the store. In the same way, we used to have to do tons of surveys to understand who is our customer. We don't have to do that anymore because customers are indicating what they're doing and what they're interested in all the time on social media, or using the same core technology as cell phone. Okay, so methodology. So we took our 72 different geosocial segments and we correlated against the Uber Media distance metric, and we analyzed and ranked those geosocial segments. So what we're really trying to discover is the types of interests people have, or the types of attitudes they have. Does that have any indication on if they're going to be compliant with stay-at-home orders or not? And what we found here was fascinating, to say the least. And so how we expressed it here, you can see a little graph. So who are the best and the worst at following the stay-at-home orders? So we expressed that in a percentage. So negative means they were less likely to follow stay-at-home orders and they traveled more. And then positive is mean they're more likely to follow stay-at-home orders and travel less. Okay, so we're going to look first at the people that followed stay-at-home orders well. So what we did here is we looked at the dominant geosocial segments in a block group. So if yoga advocates was really high in a block group, we labeled that block group a yoga advocate block group. So we can see the best people at following stay-at-home orders are yoga advocates, followed by outdoor adventures. You have a few other geosocial segments here: organized sports, farm culture, happily ever after, competitive nature. And we'll get into these in a little bit more depth and really try to understand why exactly that was working. So now let's look at the people that did not follow stay-at-home orders very well. A new picture begins to emerge. So you can see the bottom: hip hop culture, smoke culture, party life. These people were not particularly good at following stay-at-home orders. And just as you stand back overall, I think an interesting insight, if you come from a block group that scores highly for yoga advocates, you're about 17% more likely to follow stay-at-home orders than a block group that was dominant for hip-hop culture, just purely based on the behaviors that are going on around you. So let's see if we can make sense of why some of these people follow stay-at-home orders and what were the common threads here. Okay, so we can see here a first hypothesis. And from a policy and analytics perspective, it's really important to understand these common threads and what exactly hold us together. So a few hypotheses, as we know the social segments, are maybe this has to do with older population. And this is sort of true overall. So farm culture, praise and worship match that description in this set. But there's things like organized sports, competitive nature, and lighthearted fun that really buck that trend. So it isn't exactly just older population that are better at following the stay-at-home orders. Another hypothesis is that these segments represent higher income areas. So overall, again, that's somewhat true. But there's some surprising ones here that don't necessarily follow that. LGBTQ culture, wine lovers, and wealth signaling are some of our highest income segments, and they don't show up anywhere here. Whereas we have praise and worship, which in the Georgia area isn't necessarily correlated with high income. So there's something more to the story going on. One thing that is clear, in a different study, we ran these geosocial segments against health outcome variables at emergency centers and hospitals. And all of these segments have a correlation with people not having adverse health outcomes and going to emergency centers less. It's good to know, but we still don't exactly know why these people are better at following the stay-at-home orders. So I think we can find that if we look at this in contrast and see what is true about the people that did not follow the stay-at-home orders or are less afraid of going out.
Yeah, Lyden, before we jump to that next slide, we actually do have a question from the audience. Can you explain what the percent difference is in terms of like, what is it compared to? What's the difference to?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So it's the percent difference traveled. So we took the average block group, and so yoga advocates were 5%. So block groups that were high in yoga advocates traveled 5% less than the average. Hip hop culture traveled 12% more than the average.
Got it. Well, let's look at
question.
Yeah, and let's look at that hip hop culture.
Cool. Okay, so maybe kind of as you step back and you look at some of these, some of them make a whole lot of sense. So we see hip hop culture, smoke culture, party life, live experiences. If you live in block groups that are historically known or dominant for this type of behavior, you are considerably less likely to follow stay-at-home orders. So this kind of creates a picture for us. So we can look at some of the hypothesis here is that maybe these people are younger, and so they're just less afraid of going out. Again, that's overall true, but missing from this is our two youngest segments, which is bookish and student life. So again, there's a health theme here. All of these variables have some sort of correlation with actually adverse health outcomes in emergency centers and hospitals and going to emergency centers and hospitals more often. So that's interesting, but it also, again, doesn't exactly explain why. There is one segment that to us sticks out like a sore thumb from all of these other segments, and that is family time for obvious reasons, and they're also a little bit higher income. So let's actually, I always love it when something sticks out as bizarre, and then you can really dig into that. So let's dig into family life to see if we can understand why exactly those people didn't follow stay-at-home orders. So here's a look at our family time segment. Just real quick on how our segments are built. They're purely built of the texts that are coming out of the area. We use a machine clustering algorithm. So the machine found a mathematical relationship between family time, s'mores, family birthdays, squad goals, family first, in-laws, and making memories and gratitude. So, you know, as a machine, doesn't know exactly why it came up with that cluster, but as humans, we clearly know that these are people expressing family time and having fun with family. So I just want to point you guys really quickly to one of these 15. There's thousands of words that make up this document here, but in-laws is what I want to point you to. So I don't know if you guys have kind of just checked this out, but people are visiting their in-laws. And the family birthday is another one. How many people have seen family birthdays on front porches rather than inside recently? I just find this fascinating that these people desire social connection with their family, and that is driving them to essentially break stay-at-home orders, which is really fascinating to me. And really, that's a clue as to what are the commonalities that hold all of these segments together.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Lyden, because actually yesterday was my aunt's birthday, and I did go over to say happy birthday. We sang happy birthday outside of the house, social, like being 6 feet apart. But I rarely leave the house, and for that, it was important for me to be there and say happy birthday.
Yeah, yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, humans are there's common things among humans across the U.S. And I think that's why Georgia is so interesting, because it's a bellwether, and the patterns that we see here, we might also see them across the U.S. So ultimately, the thread that holds these together is that effective social distancers have the unique capability of finding fulfillment internally. Think about yoga advocates. Think about praise and worship. These all are patterns where people can find their own fulfillment internally, whereas we look at it in contrast, ineffective social distancers are people that travel more, come from a place where historically social connection is very important, and they essentially have a missing piece of their life. For example, party life, hip hop culture, family time also follows those patterns. So demographically, there are some patterns, but the true thing holding this together is people desiring social connection versus people finding their fulfillment internally. So really interesting ethnographic insight. That would have taken months of surveys and interviews, and by the time we would have done that, it would have been all over anyways. The implications are very interesting for this as well. So I have a few implications written out, but I also noticed some of the sectors that you guys came from. So I'm going to spitball a few of them. So for policymakers, first of all, here we have using the combination of mobile data and social media data, an exhaustive list of behaviors within a city to encourage or discourage to make a city more resilient. Obviously, as we come out of stay-at-home orders, we want to come out of it slowly. It isn't like and we're already seeing people doing this. So there's some things that we can really encourage to be smart about that. I know there's a lot of stay-at-home yoga programs that are going on, especially for impoverished communities. I think we should absolutely encourage those as cities, as well as outdoor adventures. Like, encourage people to go visit your city and see some of those more outdoors sites to see versus going into the center of the city where they might be closer to people. So we have an exhaustive list. This list is essentially a brainstorming list. What types of things do you have in your city that you can encourage or discourage when it comes to tourism, when it comes to policy? Another social implication here is this really works as a magnifying glass. So using the social distancing metric, you can see which communities aren't particularly good at social distancing, but there's very different reasons why they might not be good at social distancing. I didn't mention the deep emotions and heartfelt sharing as they were not very good at social distancing. These are essentially depressive segments. These are people really talking about problems in their life, relationship problems. And so when you see an area that is not socially distancing very well, and you see one of the reasons is because there's a lot of deep emotions or depressive activity in that area, you would want to speak to that area very, very sensitively versus an area that is not socially distancing because of family time. They're visiting their family. There's very different reasons. There's a why behind why people are moving and why they're not moving. And so that's something that we can kind of consider as we're making our policies and making our marketing to reach those people. A few other things that I thought of as I looked at the folks that have joined the webinar. For tourism, I might actually consider looking at the inverse. So which people are not particularly afraid to get out? I might actually look at the people that aren't social distancing or are moving more. They're already indicating that they may be feeling a little bit less fear to get out. So I might consider that cohort of people. I saw there's an agency that is working for an amusement park here. I would also be looking around that the locations of the amusement park to see what are the block groups where people are getting out there and moving. And I would focus on advertising to those block groups, the opening, before I would advertise to the folks that are not getting out and moving. And you have a list of the types of people that are in those block groups and how to reach them. So that's an opportunity as well.
Great, and Lyden, I want to mention that somebody in the Q&A also mentioned it's not in terms of family time, I think it's not only because I have to go visit family, but also my kids are driving me nuts. And we need to get out and like go for a walk or head out to somewhere else that they can play besides inside the house.
That's cool. This is kind of an interesting anecdote as we've seen our data move. Our data generally stays pretty stable in areas, but there's a metropolitan and then sort of like a suburban divide in our data. And you can see in urban areas, the segment that is risen the most of all of our segments because of COVID is animal lovers and dog lovers. So people in urban areas are spending much more time and thinking a lot more about their dogs. There's only few people in the department to connect with. Now, on the other hand, related to the family thing, we have now seen in suburban areas, people are really turning towards their families and talking about their families more. Now, we don't know the sentiment. All we know is that they're talking about their families more. So it could be in a negative way, or it could be in a positive way. And I certainly see that out here. There's a ton of families that get out and walk. So thanks for making that comment. I think that is absolutely true.
And there are probably a lot more Instagram videos of my dogs than there was before, or before all of this. What he's hanging out with me, she's hanging out with me. So. Well, Leiden, thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar and giving us some insight into what social sentiment data can do and how it can be paired with mobile location data to gain more insight into who, right? The who is who's in the area. These new areas that, for example, that Sonic might be able to market to. Like what does that customer behavior or makeup look like? What are they talking about? What appeals to them? This could be data that can give insights into that. Thank you. All right, well, I'm gonna jump in. I know we're at the top of the hour. We're gonna end it with going back to the COVID-19 researcher portal. And I have Connor here to give us some insight into what's new.
All right, thank you, Evelina. So I just wanted to take a quick few seconds to go over some of the resources that we've made available to anyone on our COVID-19 researcher portal. So starting off with a couple things to highlight. We have our research data directory, where we provided research from a variety of providers, including a listing for spatial AI, which you just heard from, all gathered into one place, along with some mobile data tutorials. And so those are, of course, guides for using mobile location data to study the impact of COVID-19 specifically. That kind of goes along the theme for Uber Media in general, which is that we want to make it easy for you to go from idea for analysis to action. And so we provided some of the pieces there that are able to make it very easy for you to get started and start looking at the impact of COVID-19 and social distancing. Those, of course, join the other pieces of our researcher portal, which include our research blog, where you can find all the analysis you've seen in this webinar, as well as previous webinars in written format. And then we also have our mailing list, which you can join to get updates on things like new data sets we'll put on the portal, upcoming webinars, and even other material that we release on a weekly cadence. As a reminder, once more, our webinars are now bi-weekly, but we will, of course, be sending new materials to everyone's inbox and posting it on the blog every Thursday. And then, so just again, one other quick overview of the researcher portal. But the thing I really want to highlight is Vista Property Report. So this is the tool that you all saw earlier in the webinar. And it's self-service. It's ready to be used by businesses of all sizes. And you can analyze your business or competitors and understand visitation based on historical data. So again, the really cool thing here is that it's very, very flexible. So you can look at any site in the US, and you can look at it for any time period going back even 5 years. So super cool there. And once you find those results, you can share those very easily with a shareable URL, or even export the image of some of the analysis that you've found. So one really cool thing there is that all those kind of 10 powerful insights are available for free right now in our free trial. You can sign up for at ubermedia.com/VPR and access almost immediately. So After the webinar, I would definitely encourage everyone to go in there, sign up, play around, and take a look at maybe some of the locations in your area, locations that you own, or locations that you're interested in finding out more about, maybe how they're doing in this COVID period compared to prior to COVID. And that's it, just another quick little highlight there. And then I'll hand it back to you, Evelina, to go through the conclusions.
Great, thank you, Connor. And that free trial of the Vista property reports, I would definitely take advantage of that, because the insights that I was able to gain in just a few minutes actually was very, very interesting. So it could be any site. I've shown it to family and it makes sense to them. Like, they understand what I'm doing now. And so you can use mobile location data to really gain some insights into what is going on at your site or at any of your competitors' sites. So I just want to sum up what we found in this study with Georgia. The conclusions that we came up with is that we saw with the data is recovery is probably going to be a gradual process, and we saw that in the data. Georgia opened up and lifted stay-at-home orders, but we didn't see a huge uptake in traffic, nothing near what we were pre-COVID-19. And so that's I think reflective of our views of COVID-19 and social distancing. Another thing is looking at essential businesses and understanding, and QSRs and non-essential businesses, and understanding, okay, what is the new norm for them, and understanding what they can do about this new norm and what mobile data can give them insight into that. And then we also looked at social distancing and understanding and paired with social sentiment data, and seeing that it's aligned with internal and external fulfillment in terms of those social segments that, that Leiden had showed us earlier with spatial AI. So I'm going to throw this out to questions and answers, and it looks like somebody threw in a puppy. I did not see this earlier. This is, I think, our puppy that our VP is going to get in the next few weeks. So we're going to have a little puppy in the Uber Media realm. I wouldn't say office, because we don't have an office right now, but in the Uber Media space. So I do have one question that was sent over in Q&A, and I know that that some of the other ones have already been answered in the chat. So the question is, what do you predict with regards to PVOD versus movie theaters, so short-term and long-term for new releases? So I think this is comparing video on demand, so paid video on demand, so Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and I know NBC is getting into that game, and comparing that to movie theaters, and in terms of new releases. And I think, you know, based off of the poll we had with 40% of our attendees saying that they're going to be stay at home, we would guess that perhaps that movie theater recovery is going to be slow. But it's something that we're monitoring very closely, as we had seen earlier with those sectors and looking at that foot traffic. Are we going to see that uptake? But what's interesting, I think it was with the Trolls movie, that did really, really well, even though it was rental only. So there might be a shift in what the new norm is going to be for movie theaters. Another question here is Vista property reports data only available for US data? What about Canada? The answer to that is that Canada is coming soon for the Vista property report. We do have data all over the world internationally, but for Vista property reports, Canada is coming soon. All right, another question here is, do you think other states will recover more quickly if it is determined that there is not a surge of new cases in Georgia after reopening? You know, I think there's a lot of interest in Georgia, and some of our research partners have mentioned that they're very interested in monitoring Georgia with mobile location data. So they are for sure our canary in a coal mine, so to speak. Well, I think it's a wait and see game. We only have about a week of data. And it'll be interesting to see in the upcoming weeks what it's going to look like for Georgia and what that's going to mean for other states. I know that even in Los Angeles or in California, there are going to be opening some more businesses. We haven't lifted stay-at-home orders yet, but there is that move to opening more businesses up. All right, let me see if there's anything else. Final question here. We have, speaking of dogs and puppies, our viewer, Phil Whitcomb, commented, COVID has turned us all into dogs. We roam the house all day looking for food. We're told no when we get too close to strangers, and we get really excited about car rides. I think that's a great way to wrap this webinar up today. If you have any questions and comments like that, or on anything that was shown in today's webinar, please be sure to contact us at contact@ubermedia.com or to reach out to your Uber Media representative. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next webinar.